Okay, so if you missed the announcements last week, we are doing something a little bit different today. Normally we have one guy come up and he stands up and he shares for about 30, 35 minutes, 40 if you're Tony, and he prays and finishes the sermon, and that's sort of the week. And we wanted to do something a little bit different this week. So the four of us guys who've been in the regular teaching rotation for a while now are all going to get up and share 8-minute sermons. Why? Why are we doing that? There are several reasons. I think it's 3, but we'll see if I come up with more as I'm going. One reason is for practice for us. It is a different kind of a training and speaking exercise to let me see if I can really expand on and delve deep into this topic for 30, 35 minutes and really drill down and get the meat of this and really go all the way down on this kind of a topic. It's a very different exercise to say, you got 8 minutes, make it count. You've got 8 minutes, really get that point across. Is one better or worse? No, we just wanted to do something a little bit different. So it's practice for us. It's also, I think, really cool opportunity to hear from all 4 different speakers in the same kind of sermon. I think one of the big things it does as well is it is us saying we don't have to do church the way that American Christians have done church exactly the same way since the 50s. We don't have to have one guy stand up here, do all the teaching 80% of the time. It's just that. People sit there. We can do things a bunch of different ways. Church looks like a lot of different things. We went through recently on a Friday night, what was the New Testament church like? And you go through Acts 2, 42 through 47, you see what is the church in Acts actually doing? And I couldn't find anything where you have to have pews, you can't have seats. One guy does all the talking and everybody else just kind of listens and sits there. I couldn't find anything in those verses that said that. And so we want to be able to do church a little bit differently, however the Spirit is leading us. And so with that, we're all going to share examples of kingdom builders from Scripture that we relate to or inspire us or somebody that we have taken things away from. And I think that, we've been talking about and setting up what is a kingdom builder, what does a kingdom builder look like and do for the beginning part of this semester, and now we're going to transition a little bit more into, let's look at specific kingdom builders from Scripture. And so for me, I was thinking about this, what kind of guys do I really relate to and want to talk about, and when I became a pastor, I had really big comparison game problems. And it's stuff that I still struggle with, but it's a lot less now. You go to a pastor's conference when you're not a pastor, you're like, wow, those are really cool. Those guys are doing all these things. That's awesome. Go with them. I would love to do that someday. And then you become a pastor, and they're doing all these things, and you're like, oh, I'm not doing any of those things. Nothing magic happened when I became a pastor. Nothing changed dramatically. I didn't all of a sudden have Obadiah 2:10 just memorized like all those guys seem to, and just whip out whatever verse they need at any given time. Nothing magically transformed. And so it's really easy to compare yourself and say, wow, I don't have every verse memorized like they seem to. I don't have 30 years of teaching. I don't have 30 years of doing any kind of experience. And I don't have all the stuff that they have, and my church isn't doing the things that their church is doing, and my outreach doesn't look like their outreach, and my life doesn't look like their life, and man, am I a terrible pastor? Am I a terrible Christian? Am I bad at doing my job? And it's really easy to play that comparison game. You go to something, you go around a bunch of other pastors, you're supposed to be really encouraged and jazzed up, and I would always leave those times incredibly discouraged at all the stuff I wasn't doing, because I felt like I had to do everything myself. You see, there's 30, 50, 100 guys, and you hear all the things they're doing, the impact for the kingdom that they're having, you go, wow, I have to do everything that they are doing by myself. That's the feeling. You hear a guy share about a mission trip he went on, another guy share about an outreach endeavor they're doing, another guy share about a new ministry they're starting, and you feel like, well, I'm not doing all 3 of those things. So must be something wrong with me. And it feels like you have to do everything. And I really relate to the story of Nehemiah. And Nehemiah was an Israelite when the Israelites were in captivity in Babylon, the same captivity as we get Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So that same captivity, there was this guy Nehemiah. And he looked at his city of Jerusalem where his ancestors were buried, and he said to King Artaxerxes, he said, can I rebuild my city? It's a shame on me and my people and my family. Our city is just in shambles. Can I go back and rebuild it? And the king said, sure, go for it. I don't care. And so he goes back and knows the first thing he has to do to make sure that place is safe and secure for the people who are living there is build the wall. They have enemies all around them. There's people throughout history who've been trying to destroy the Israelite people. They need a wall to protect themselves. So he says, all right, let's go and build this wall. It's the first thing we're going to do. He spends some time kind of surveying the area and the city. He's like, yeah, we got to build the wall. And it's this monumental task. And I don't know if you have ever, thought through the process of ancient times wall buildings. Sometimes building a city could take years or decades because of how primitive the technology was and how difficult it is to just move that much stone and everything and getting the manpower and everything. So what did they end up doing? They've got years that they have to build this wall where they're all in danger this entire time. No, they don't do that. It goes through and it says and it lays out, how do they go about building the wall? Everybody takes a chunk. It goes through and just lists person after person after person after person. This person did this, and they built this gate, and they restored that wall, and these people and those people and their daughter and their uncle helped them build this, and this person's sister helped them build that. And so you see, they're all doing this sort of, everybody just takes a section and says, I'm going to worry about this section of wall here. And when I can, I'm going to help my neighbor out, and my neighbor's going to help me out, and I don't have to build the whole wall. I don't have to build everything myself. I'm going to build this section here. I'm going to rebuild this one gate. And that was just so encouraging to me to remember I don't have to rebuild the entire wall of Jerusalem by myself. I've got to figure out what is my gifting, what is my calling. I got to have people that are on my team that can help me and I can help them. And I can figure out, can I just build this section of wall that's in front of me? I want to contrast this a little bit. There's a Christian author and speaker named Dr. Bill Bright, and there's a question that he has often posed people in his writings and his teachings where he says, if every Christian was doing what you are doing, if everyone was living and walking and sharing and teaching as you are doing specifically, would the entire world be reached for Christ in this generation? Whew. That's a convicting kind of a sentence. If you were the average, the baseline, if everyone was doing exactly what you were doing, would the whole world be reached for Christ in the next 20 years? How long would it take? Take 5 years? Are you way ahead of the game? Would it take 500 years if everyone was doing exactly what you were doing? If everyone was operating in their gifting as much as you are, if everyone was walking as close to the Lord as you are, if everyone was sharing the gospel as much as you are, how long would it take to reach the entire world for Christ? And as I was thinking about this story, I really related to this guy in the Bible called Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah, Babylon, Israelites, captives, go rebuild Jerusalem. We'll just catch right back up to where we were. What did they do to rebuild the wall? Everyone built the section of wall in front of them. And there's a tension that I wanted to share. You don't have to feel like you have to rebuild the entire walls of Jerusalem yourself, but you do have to build the section in front of you. You do have to set your hands to the wall and work and build and work on the kingdom. There is stuff that is designed for you. You can't just sit back and let other people build the wall in the kingdom for you. We all have roles and jobs and giftings and callings that we need to be operating in. So, one, we don't have to rebuild the whole wall ourselves. But we do have to be working on a section of the wall. We do have to be putting our hands to something. So Walter is going to come up now, and he's going to share a little bit about the life of Joseph and the lessons that we can learn from that. As I hand him the mic and stall for him to get more time.
Stall for time. When I was thinking about what person I wanted to focus on for this sermon, I was thinking back a lot to my earlier years at Ablaze and how much I've grown since then. And a person really inspired me was Joseph, because beginning of Ablaze, I didn't realize that I had, a hatred problem. I was holding on to stuff, to anger, to bitterness, to malice towards another person, and I still struggle with it a bit, but I had a really big issue being very pessimistic. I would often see the worst in everyone and expect the worst in everyone, and basically not expect anything good when I first meet someone. So finally reading, going through Joseph's life and reviewing it, it amazed me the capacity he had for forgiveness, because he had reason to be angry, and how many high and low points he went through throughout his life. So Joseph, he was the son of Jacob and his second wife, Rachel. And from the get-go, it states that, yeah, he was the beloved son. He was the favorite. He was spoiled. His father made him an ornate robe. And if any of you have younger siblings, you know that oftentimes the youngest gets away with everything. So I have a younger sibling. Yes, he does. And eventually his brothers were consumed by bitterness and jealousy and anger, and they plotted to kill him, but changed their minds. One of the brothers ended up changing their minds, and instead they threw him in a cistern and had him sold into slavery. Now, that is a really big betrayal. Your brothers literally sold you off to slavery. And after that, after going through that, being sold, he was sold to Potiphar, who was the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. And he attacked that situation, what I feel like was a good attitude, because he put everything he had into it. So much so that Potiphar saw what he was doing, and God was with Joseph still and blessed what he was doing. And he gave him more responsibility and more responsibility, up to the point where everything that Potiphar had, Joseph was in charge of. And Potiphar trusted Joseph implicitly to take care of his house and all of his possessions. So it's a pretty good high point, especially for a slave, to reach that standard, but then it takes a downturn. Potiphar's wife wants to sleep with him, and Joseph says no, because you shouldn't. He was loyal to Potiphar and his master, so as a response, she basically frames him for trying to sleep with her. And then he is imprisoned. Now, I am very impressed by his resiliency here, because honestly, I would probably be like, well, I guess this is my life now. I'm in prison. I tried and it didn't work out. But instead, he put the same amount of effort working for Potiphar, being in that prison. The warden was also impressed by Joseph. God was still with Joseph the entire time he was stuck in prison. So the warden eventually also left Joseph in charge of a lot of the things that had to be done in the prison. He was in charge of the people that were held there and any of the tasks that had to get done. So much so that it states that if there was something he was in charge of, the warden would ignore it because he knew that it would be taken care of. It is in the prison where Joseph begins to decipher dreams through God. He encounters a cupbearer and a baker, and fortunately and unfortunately for one of them, the dreams they had that Joseph predicts comes true. One of them is returned to Pharaoh's side, the other one is executed. And a couple years after that, the Pharaoh is also plagued by dreams. He was facing these different dreams, and Joseph was able to decipher them for him. Essentially, there would be 7 years of plentiful harvest for Egypt and a famine in which that Egypt would not survive. The only way they would survive is that someone with God's Spirit guiding them and helping them would be able to make it through the famine. And it is thus that Joseph goes from being imprisoned to being the second most powerful person of all of Egypt, because Pharaoh put him in charge of everything in Egypt. Only he would be greater. And with God's guidance, Joseph was able to store up grain and food for Egypt, and famine hit. And it is through this that he meets his siblings again. Now, Joseph is in an extreme position of power. It would be so easy to get revenge. It would not be that hard. His brothers come because his home, Canaan, has also been hit by the famine, and they need food too. They're willing to pay for it. But he accuses them of being spies. He could have just been like, no, you're dead now. And they could have all been executed. And he did mess with them a little bit. He made them produce their youngest brother at the time, which was Benjamin. It was the brother after Joseph. And eventually, after messing with them, and he framed Benjamin for stealing from him, he came clean to his brothers that it was him, that he didn't die, that he was in this position of power, and he forgave them. He said that, as much as I was angry, I understand now that God is the one that sent me here so I could save Egypt, that I could save our family. And through that, he was able to bring his entire family to Egypt and help them survive. It reminded me of two verses in Colossians 3:13. Bear with each other and forgive another. If any of you has grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And the second one being Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Which is essentially what Joseph had been doing. Had he held on to that anger and bitterness, and had he just given up and just accepted where he was and do the bare minimum, I do not think God would have been able to do anything through him. He put everything he had into whatever position he was stuck in, no matter how bad it was, which was very inspiring to me, because I've struggled a lot with, if I'm hit with a bad situation, I kind of just want to not deal with it, just coast as much as I can. But reading the story is just a reminder that, we have the God of the universe at our back. And so long as, we put in the effort, even though it can be really hard, God can make a lot of good out of it, which is exactly what he did with Joseph. So, I think after this is Jordan, who's going to be talking about Solomon, as I also stall for time for him to get up here.
All right, so if you mention wisdom and the Bible in the same breath, you'll almost certainly immediately think of Solomon. He was so wise, and that wisdom and that fear of the Lord that he had such a profound impact that we still talk about him today. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, all written by Solomon, and very impactful on me. I enjoy taking in wisdom and applying it, and at least attempting to apply it. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. But through Solomon's story, we'll see that wisdom can come at a cost if it's applied and handled incorrectly. And we'll talk about how we and how I am learning how to seek and hold wisdom in a healthy way. So Solomon, his life since 2 Samuel and 1 Kings, and at least that's what I'll be pulling from today. His story starts in kind of a tumultuous way with two people you probably heard of, David and Bathsheba. David sees Bathsheba ironically taking a bath, which is weird, but and he's like, you know what, I want to be with her, so I'm going to kill her husband, and birds and bees and everything. And they eventually have a kid, and God's like, no, this is not going to fly, so the kid dies. And David and Bathsheba mourn him as a consequence, of what David did to Bathsheba's marriage and her household and her husband. And after all that was over, they had another kid in a more peaceful scenario, and his name was Solomon. And Solomon means peace, and I think that's incredibly symbolic. Peace after the storm with David and Bathsheba and all the fallout and aftermath of that. And then God also named him Jedediah via Nathan the prophet, which means loved by the Lord. And the Lord immediately loved Solomon, 1 Kings says, as he was born. And we see that throughout his life, how the Lord did love him and did prosper him. So David promised that Solomon was going to be king, despite David's other son, Adonijah, being technically next in line for the throne. And Adonijah was going to become king, maybe by force, and probably kill Solomon and Bathsheba and all of his brothers, so that he could get the throne and keep the throne. But in the end, David named Solomon king, and he took the throne, and almost miraculously, quickly, as at least as the Bible describes it, as far as the amount of words. And yeah, so he takes the throne, and things are good, and God makes him the wisest person in existence at the time, and he takes that wisdom and he applies it, and he builds the temple, and things are good and peaceful. And God told Solomon that he should walk faithfully, and then blessings would follow, and if he would return away, then Israel would be cut off from their land. And so Solomon's like, cool, sounds good. I'm going to just, go ahead and keep ruling according to you. And it was amazing. He built this magnificent temple and put the Ark of the Covenant in it. Had these massive, like, cedar beams and these two of these 15-foot by 15-foot gold cherubim, which is just the most insane flex ever, and had these huge stones. And he had an Egyptian wife who was actually Pharaoh's daughter, which is amazing to see how God will bless people. Israel coming from Egypt to begin with as slaves, and now being partners with Egypt as peers. Just another symbolic, cool thing that God did. The Bible says the whole world, as 1 Kings 10:24, the whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom that God put in his heart. People were coming from to Jerusalem to hear the godly wisdom that Solomon had. And it was all in the middle of this imposing display of God's provision, all of this wealth, God-given wealth. They saw that God was a provider and that he took care of his people. So much so, there's this woman named the Queen of Sheba who heard about him and his public service to the Lord. And she came to see him, and she was so amazed that there's this quote from her in there that says, "Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness." You probably saw this coming. There is a but. But Solomon loved many foreign women other than his original wife, and they turned him from the Lord and to other gods like Molech and Ashtoreth and Chemosh, I believe it's pronounced. That sounds bad enough, but you might be aware, one of the ways that you worship Molech is by sacrificing children in fire. And Solomon set up places of worship for these gods. And, of course, then God raised up adversaries for him. So you can't help but think, like, wow, he started off so amazing in this, he created this amazing display of God's glory. And then he ends up turning away and following idols that do these terrible things. How did he drift so far from God? David also had a whole bunch of wives, not 700 plus 300 concubines. That's insane. But David had a lot of wives, and he was led into sin somewhat because of that too. And he still turned back to God and repented every time. But why didn't Solomon necessarily do that? I think maybe because he became intellectually self-sufficient in his own eyes. Intellectually self-sufficient in his own eyes. I think this is a temptation we've been facing, honestly, since the Garden of Eden, to elevate ourselves, to, symbolically, I guess, eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, to try to be like God and then have control as humans. And we have to reckon with having that knowledge that we're not really designed to have. We're designed to rely on God and to live in communion with him. And because of that, I think just as when we think we're self-sufficient materially, we tend to think we can do it on our own physically. also when we think we're self-sufficient intellectually, we can think we don't need God as well to discern, to make it through life, to fight temptation, and to stick close to God. You know, Solomon was able to answer every single one of the Queen of Sheba's questions. Nothing was too hard for him. And I wonder, wouldn't that make it easier to forget that that wisdom was God-given, God imparted directly to Solomon? You know, but we also know that at some point in his life, Solomon was wise enough to write down Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. It's not of ourselves. It's not of our own learning, our own discernment, our own character, but we have to rely on God. And Jesus mirrored this as well. It was Mark 10:14-15. Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. So we have to recognize, I have to recognize and apply, and something I'm learning is God's wisdom is so much bigger than us, so much bigger than ours, and we have to accept that and not trust our own intellect so much. You know, we have to not solely rely on ourselves, and that's not a reason to despair, not a reason to decide, oh, I'm not going to learn anything. I just, you know, I'm not doing anything unless I directly hear from God or learning it. You know, God still gave us some intellect, but the pressure is now off because we realize that we are his children in the kingdom of God. We don't have to constantly think we should have known better or have to compare to other people when we realize that we're all children in the kingdom of God. And I think that's also why the goal of these sermons is not for you to listen to me or any of the other guys up here necessarily, or perceive that we have authority on our own, you know, especially not myself. But we believe that this is from God, and we're all children of God. So if you feel like that we say something that is not of God, then you feel free to challenge us on it, because we are all on this level, especially me. So how do we remain aware of our reliance on God and apply that and end our lives in a better place than Solomon's? I think that we have to be mindful of how everything we've been given is a gift, whether it's physical or intellectual, and be aware of how infinite and stable God is. And I think we do this, at least things that I've learned to do, is journaling and prayer, thanking God for every little thing, and just abiding in Christ. And I think that'll lead us to Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. And I'll give it to Tony to wrap it all up.
Thank you. So as I was about a year ago in a mini dream retreat, which is just an opportunity to kind of share when you really felt like God was working through you. Just an opportunity to kind of figure out what resonates with you, how you're wired, what your gifting and calling is. I was doing it with two unbelievable, I can't believe I got to do this. I was with Dave Ping, who is a world-renowned author, and I was also doing it with Rick Beamer, who's just an incredible man of God. And so they were listening to my 3 or 4 stories about exactly when I felt like, I knew for a fact I was in God's will. And so one of the things you're doing is you're just kind of sharing these stories, and they're seeing patterns within the stories. And then one of the things that comes out of that is there a biblical character that aligns with you, that they see sort of in you? And so as I'm telling my stories, I'm going through it, and then we get to that section where you say, well, is there a Bible character that represents that kind of thing? I'm like, oh, it's Paul. I'm Paulish. I'm apostolic. I'm entrepreneurial. I like new things. Paul was just, let's pick up and go and plant churches. Let's go do this in a very apostolic way. And so I always resonated with Paul whenever I read Scripture. And they were listening to my stories, and all of my stories were when I was alone with God. all the times I knew, I was hiking the Appalachian Trail and God was there and he spoke some things to me. I was sitting beside a lake and God spoke some things to me. I was sort of totally by myself and God was sharing some things with me that I knew were from him. Rick Beamer's, every single one of his stories were with somebody else in community. So it doesn't matter, that part doesn't matter. It also doesn't matter which character you resonate with. Nick resonates with Nehemiah. And it was Joseph, and it was Solomon. And so you may be different. In what they shared with me is they said, Tony, we don't see Paul in what you have been doing in your ministry. We see David. We see King David. And because you go and get alone with God, just like David would do, he'd be out with the sheep. He'd be there by himself. It's in different stories in Scripture talked about him out there by himself. And then he would come into a situation where leadership was needed. 15-year-old boy. The whole army is completely stymied by one guy, one big guy, really big guy. What does David do? David says, I've been with God. I've been out there in the field with God. I had some bears and some lions and some stuff like that come, and God and we took care of them. You're not going to let this guy blaspheme the living God. We're going to do something about it. God's going to take care of it, and I'm going to go step up and do it. And so he did. So he jumped out there and he did what was needed at the time. And so they were seeing things in my life where I would be alone with the Lord. Lord would give me some insight. And when a situation arose, I would just step into that situation and lead where it was needed. The other thing about David they kept seeing in me, and some of you have seen this in me, is this idea of abiding. This idea of just getting your power from this being in God's presence. One of the verses that comes to mind for that is Psalms 1, verses 2 and 3. Blessed is the man who does not sit in the seat of the mocker or stand in the way of the wicked, but he meditates on God's law day and night. And he will be like a tree planted by streams of water, and he will bear fruit in season, and he will not wither when the dryness comes, and everything he does will prosper. And so that idea of where do I get this power from? It's this stream of living water that comes from abiding. And the other thing you see about David, he does that all the time. So in Psalm 63, it talks about the idea of him doing that in the middle of the night. He says, I get up in the middle of the night and spend some time with God when it's quiet and nobody's around. I'm going to just meditate on God and our relationship. There's one more thing you see about David that I think resonates with me a lot. Some people who live near me or around me will say this is true, is David sings a lot. In 2 Samuel 22, verse 1, it says that, after there had been this situation, David was singing to the Lord. He was just praising him. He was worshiping God. All of the Psalms were made to music. They were songs that David would sing. When Solomon would get all upset, what would he do? He'd bring David in to sing the songs. Nobody does that. Nobody actually ever brings me in to sing songs because they don't sound that great. But the Lord seems to think so. God seems to think so. And he's jumping up and down and worshiping when they bring the ark in, and his wife gets a little embarrassed, and he's like, you know what? I don't care. I don't care. I'm just worshiping God. Me and God, we're worshiping. You want to join in? Awesome. You don't want to join in? Fine. I don't care. That's what it means to be really connected to God, and then when the situation comes up, you step forward. So they were very much in encouraging me that, you know what, you're a lot more like David than you are like Paul. And that has really resonated with me the last year. That has really been something that resonated strong with me. And so I guess my real question to you guys is to think about, when do you know God's there? When do you know you're in the middle of God's will? You're doing God's thing. And are there Bible characters that resonate with you? Are there Bible characters that go, I'm like Esther, or I'm like this person, or I'm like that person. And here's the great thing, and this is what Nick was saying, you don't have to be the same. The Bible is filled with different characters. They're not all playing the same role. They're not all doing the same thing. Look at Ruth's story. What did Ruth do? Ruth just served. Ruth just served her mother-in-law. She just served eventually her husband, and then she just served the kingdom of God because she became in the lineage of Jesus. And it's just story after story after story like that. What was Nehemiah doing before he became the guy who rebuilt the wall? Anybody know what his job was for Artaxerxes? He was a cupbearer. What was the guy doing that let Joseph out of the jail? He was a cupbearer too. They weren't having these high positions when they had these incredible impacts on the kingdom. They were just there serving. Like I think what Walter was saying, they were just doing what was put in front of them well, whatever that was. That's what's so beautiful about our situation here as a church body is all of us have different parts and all of us have different roles. A lot of people came in and cleaned up and straightened up and put up and set up and all kinds of stuff this morning because that's what we need in the new facility. Some of us are going to be more evangelistic. Some of us are going to be more outreach oriented. Some of us are going to be focused on prayer. All those things are spectacular and needed in the kingdom. Which character in Scripture, just think about that this week, which character in Scripture do you resonate with? And I think this is what Nick was saying, be okay with that. Be okay with that. Don't keep looking at yourself and looking at your neighbor, looking at yourself and looking at your neighbor and doing one of two things. Don't look at your neighbor and look down on them because they're different than you. Right? Oh, you don't do as much of this as I do. Stop it. That's wrong. And don't do it the other way around. Don't look at your neighbor and say, wow, I wish I did this as much as you did. Now, if it's growing real close to Jesus, maybe that's a good thing you can all emulate. Because what's a kingdom builder? We said it's three different aspects. It's one is, are you helping lost people get closer to Jesus? Two, are you helping believers get closer to Jesus? Grow in the relationship. And three, are you yourself growing closer to Jesus? You're building the kingdom of God when you do any of those three things, and all of those three things are critical. So be you and be okay with it. And let God live through you. And I'm not saying be you in the flesh. I'm saying be you in the spirit. Be the spirit you that God has designed you to be. And be okay with it. Let me pray for us. God, we just thank you so much for the opportunity to share and just be the body of Christ. And all of us have different roles and all of us have different responsibilities. And God, help us to do those things well. Help us to be okay being different. But God, help us to just help one another be more and more like you, to know you more and more, to understand more and more who you are and how much you love us and who you've made us to be in Christ. And I thank you, God, for all of the just varied stories and examples of kingdom builders in the Bible that we can be like, we can emulate, we can grow more and more like you as we see the good sides of some of the things in the different people in Scripture. But God, ultimately, we want to become more and more like your Son. Thank you for sending him. Thank you for giving us a role model that we could all follow. Just recognizing that we're all going to have different places and roles. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.